In 1915, the pro-Klan movie, Birth of a Nation, was released. It became a recruiting tool to help the Klan reach its peak membership of almost 2 million. That film incorporated material from Democrat Woodrow Wilson's History of the American People, including Wilson's latent support for the Klan and its abominable practice of Southern redemption. President Woodrow Wilson even showed this racist Klan recruiting film at the White House, the first film ever shown at the White House. Wilson also enacted pro-segregation policies within his administration. By the way, much attention has been focused in state and federal legislatures on reparations proposals, that is, on the seeking of government payments to African Americans for the historical violation of their civil rights. Yet given the political history of African Americans, it might be much more appropriate if those demands for reparations were made to the Democrat Party rather than to the federal government. Returning to the historical timeline, by 1932, Republican Herbert Hoover had finished his first term as president and was running for re-election. His challenger was Democrat Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In that election, Roosevelt, in an unusual move, invited black Americans to vote Democratic in the elections. Roosevelt understood his party, however, and made only subtle overtures to black Americans while avoiding any overt civil rights promises. So how did black Americans respond to Roosevelt's invitation to join the Democrats? They printed and distributed this handbill. At the bottom, its caption reads, "Who's a Democrat?" Most would assume this statement to be a question. However, it's not. It's a declaration rather than a question. Notice the exclamation mark rather than the question mark at the end of the caption. So what statement was being made here about the Democrats? Examine the picture. A young black boy gazing prayerfully up toward heaven as if seeking hope or help. At his foot is a newspaper. Notice the title on the paper. Lynch, 2 more in Florida. That headline referred to 2 recent lynchings in Florida, those of Richard and Charles Smoke on August the 28th, 1931. For black Americans in that day, reminding them of lynchings was enough said about Democrats. Of all forms of violent intimidation, lynchings were by far the most effective. Between 1882 and 1964, 4,743 individuals were lynched, 3,446 blacks and 1,297 whites. Republicans often led the efforts to pass federal anti-lynching laws, and their platforms consistently called for a ban on lynching. But Democrats successfully blocked those bills, and the Democratic platforms never did condemn lynchings. The accounts of lynchings are not just the lore of ancient American history. Many alive today still vividly remember those horrid occurrences, and many were personally and directly impacted by lynchings. One such individual is the Reverend Charles Jackson of Houston. Reverend Jackson is well known across the nation as one of its most successful ministers. He was the first pastor in America, the first pastor of any color, to be nationally televised from the pulpit on a weekly basis. He also built a large, successful megachurch in Houston, the Pleasant Grove Missionary Baptist Church, with more than 5,000 families. Pastor Jackson has preached across the world, has helped start hundreds of churches in America and abroad, and has traveled to foreign nations in company with the U.S. President. But Reverend Jackson's beginnings were very humble. He was raised in East Texas. One night, a terrified young black boy came running up to their house. Pastor Jackson's grandfather went out onto the front porch to defend the young man.
What's going on, son?
They after me. They gonna string me up, that's what they gonna do.
Simmer down, simmer down. You can get on in here, come on.
Look,
Get me a piece of this rowdy bar.
I can't stay here with you.
Let's see who get a face full of buckshot.
No, I can't put you through this. Look, they'll kill me, and they'll burn your house down and everybody in it. I gotta go.
Son, come back.
Come on, nigga.
Come on, boy. There you go.
Come on, boy.
Man, where are you? Come on, boy. We got a necktie party for you. Come on, boy. Now you've had. Come on.
I got. Look at this, boy. Take a look at that. I got it. I got you. Hey, be still, boy. Be still.
How has Pastor Jackson handled this incident that so early shaped his own life and that of his family? In the same way that so many others from that era and from previous eras handled the problem. Relying on their faith in God, which has always been at the core of the African American community, they forgave their tormentors and oppressors. Understandably, these events etched vivid, indelible pictures in the mind of Pastor Jackson's mother, who had witnessed the lynching and whose own sister had been raped and murdered by the mob. Mrs. Jackson later became pregnant, but did not know at that time whether her unborn child was a boy or a girl. Nevertheless, she faithfully prayed over that unborn child every day.
Lord, if this baby be a boy, don't let him hang from a bridge.
That unborn child for whom she faithfully prayed was Pastor Jackson. The Reverend Richard Allen, like so many black Americans before and after him, provides an excellent example. He had been a slave in Delaware, and while only a boy, he was sold separately from his mother, whom he never saw again. While still a slave, Allen became a Christian and began to preach on his and on neighboring plantations. He eventually obtained his freedom, served in the American Revolution, became a minister, and then founded the AME denomination. Despite the grief and tragedy that he had personally experienced in his own life, he understood that bitterness only harms one of the two parties involved, and quite frankly, it harms the innocent party rather than the guilty one. Therefore, Reverend Allen wisely admonished those who had been mistreated,
"Let no rancor or ill will lodge in your heart for any bad treatment you may have received from any. If you do, you transgress against God, who will not hold you guiltless. He would not suffer it even in his beloved people, Israel. And you think he will allow it unto us? I am sorry to say that too many think more of the evil than of the good they have received."
Reverend Jackson, like so many black Americans before and after him, followed the teachings of Christianity and forgave his persecutors, holding no bitterness or ill will even to this day. Many today are unaware of how much pain there was and how real lynching was in recent generations, generations still alive right now. Recall from the lynching numbers that even though almost 5,000 Americans were lynched, black Americans were lynched at a rate almost 3 times higher than whites. Why? According to Representative John Roy Lynch,
More colored than white men are thus persecuted simply because they constitute in larger numbers the opposition to the Democratic Party.
Representative Richard Kane agreed.
The bad blood of the South comes because the Negroes are Republicans. If they would only cease to be Republicans and vote the straight-out Democratic ticket, there would be no trouble. Then the bad blood would just sink entirely out of sight.